The Good Morning America studio glimmered under soft amber light, the New York skyline stretching like glass and gold behind it. The set was calm, but the crew buzzed quietly. Everyone knew this wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It was Meghan Markle, the Duchess, the headline magnet. The studio doors opened, and she entered with quiet command. Dressed in a minimalist black suit, hair drawn into a smooth knot, she exuded poise and distance in equal measure. George Stephanopoulos stood to greet her, his expression professional yet curious, as though he already sensed the tension that was about to unfold. Like, before we move on, don't forget to hit subscribe button. Meghan, he said, hand outstretched, voice practiced in warmth. Welcome. Thank you, George, she replied smoothly. Her tone was gentle but clipped, her smile rehearsed to perfection. Glad to be here. They sat opposite each other beneath the studio lights. For a moment, silence. Charged. Waiting. Cameras rolled. Red lights blinked alive. George leaned forward, shuffling his notes. You've spoken about your truth in interviews, documentaries, and podcasts, he began. But let me ask, has your truth ever conflicted with the truth? A faint stir from the audience. Meghan tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to signal annoyance masked as grace. My experiences, she said, belong to me. People love facts when they suit their stories, but lived experience isn't up for debate. George nodded once, jotting something. You've been outspoken about the royal family, he pressed on. You've described pain, neglect, even racism. Yet when asked for details, you often decline. Some critics say that's convenient. Do you think your words have hurt individuals in that family? Her smile froze. Convenient? She repeated, her voice cool and razor sharp. I spoke the truth as I lived it. It wasn't my duty to protect an institution that never protected me. But you did benefit from it, George countered, calm but firm. Titles, attention, influence. Those doors opened because of that institution. Isn't it contradictory to reject it while enjoying what it gave? A low laugh escaped her, sharp enough to cut through the studio air. That's a charmingly outdated view, she said. People assume privilege cancels pain. It doesn't. You can be visible and still invisible, the audience murmured. George set his note cards aside, sensing the shift. Now that you've built a platform here in the US, books, films, podcasts, you're controlling your story more than ever, he said. But some might say that's incompatible with your plea for privacy. Meghan leaned forward, her expression finally alive with defiance. Privacy, she said, isn't isolation, it's agency. I choose what I share. That's not hypocrisy, it's self-preservation. George studied her. So it's about control. It's about survival, she replied evenly. Something you might not understand from behind a desk. He smiled faintly, not taking the bait. Fair enough, he said, voice low. Let's talk about Harry. Let's not, she interrupted sharply. He's endured enough. This is my story, George. The tension snapped like a taut string. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The hum of the lights filled the silence. George's pen rested on his notes. Meghan's gaze, unwavering, pinned him in place. Do you ever regret stepping away? He asked finally, his tone softer, almost human. The royal life, the global stage, everything that came with it. Her eyes flickered with something. Anger, maybe sadness, maybe both. I regret believing the fairy tale, she said, but I don't regret waking up. George nodded slowly. And the cost, she inhaled. Peace has a price. I'm willing to pay it. The control room was silent. Even the crew seemed frozen, watching this battle of composure unfold. The Duchess against the anchor, the rebel against the establishment. George broke the silence first, leaning back, his voice quieter now. You know, millions will dissect every word you've said today. I know, Meghan said, standing smoothly. They always do. As she rose, the cameras zoomed in, the perfect parting shot. A poised woman walking away under bright studio lights, unbothered, unbroken. George watched her leave, his expression unreadable. Off stage, the producer whispered, "That'll trend by noon." George exhaled, still staring at the empty chair. "Oh, it already has," he murmured. The red light above the camera blinked off. Silence swallowed the room. The studio emptied slowly after the broadcast, the applause fading into low murmurs. Meghan stood by the makeup station, her reflection fractured by the vanity lights. Behind her, a producer whispered into a headset, already fielding calls from news outlets. The footage was being clipped, analyzed, devoured in real time. George stepped in from the corridor, jacket unbuttoned, his calm veneer replaced by something more human. Curiosity, maybe concern. "You didn't hold back," he said quietly. Meghan didn't turn. "Neither did you." He smiled faintly. "That's the job." "No," she replied, looking up at him in the mirror. "That's the excuse." The tension between them softened, but only slightly. The conversation that had scorched television screens just an hour earlier now existed as a heavy silence between two professionals. One used to control, the other used to exposure. "You knew what the reaction would be," George said. "You always do." "Of course," Meghan answered. "That's why I chose every word." He nodded, pacing slowly. "Still, you knew that once it aired, every phrase would be twisted, pulled apart." "That's the cost of speaking out," she said, "but silence has a cost too." For a moment, George seemed to consider that. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Meghan turned to face him fully now, arms folded. "Fighting," she echoed. "That's what you see? I call it surviving." He met her gaze. "You make people uncomfortable." "Good," she said. "Comfort never changed anything." George hesitated, then offered something almost like empathy. "You remind me of every guest who came here believing they could change the narrative." "And did they?" "Some did," he admitted, "but most just became another headline." Meghan's lips curved into a tired smile. "Then maybe it's time for a different kind of headline." Outside, camera flashes flared through the glass walls. Reporters shouted questions into the chilly November air, their voices echoing off skyscrapers. Meghan glanced at the chaos, then back at George. "You should know," she said quietly. "I never came here to win a debate. I came here to remind people I'm not afraid to be seen." George gave a slow nod. "Well, you succeeded." She picked up her coat, draping it over one arm. "Good morning, America," she said softly, half to herself. "And good luck spinning it." She walked toward the exit, her silhouette framed by the city's golden light. Outside, the noise surged. Cameras, questions, chaos. But she didn't flinch. George watched her go, still standing beneath the studio lights. Then he turned toward the control booth. "Get me the overnight ratings," he said. The producer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Already trending #1. Every network's talking." George sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course they are." He glanced once more at the empty chair across from his own. The space where truth and perception had collided live on national television. The spot where a duchess had defied the script. For a brief, strange moment, he almost admired her. Then he looked to the cameras being wheeled away and muttered, "Let's see who edits whose truth this time." Fade out. By noon, the world had already chosen sides. Clips of Meghan's interview flooded timelines, stitched into 1,000 edits and hot takes. Some praised her courage, others called her calculating. In her Manhattan hotel suite, Meghan watched the chaos unfold across muted screens. The headlines scrolled endlessly. Markle versus media, the interview that shook the morning. Did George go too far? A duchess unleashed. Her phone buzzed without pause. Texts from her team, her friends, her critics. Her publicist, Clara, stood by the window, speaking urgently into a headset. "They're asking for statements," Clara said, turning. "Every outlet wants your comment. Do we respond?" Meghan didn't look up. "No, let them talk." Clara hesitated. "It's spinning fast. If we don't shape the story." "That's the problem," Meghan cut in. "Everyone thinks they can shape me." "Let them guess for once." She muted the TV. The silence was louder than the noise. Outside, Manhattan roared. Taxis and sirens and humanity pressing in from all directions. For the first time since the interview, Meghan exhaled, eyes distant. Across town, George sat in his office, surrounded by printouts and analytics. The ratings were astronomical, record-breaking, but something about it didn't sit right. He replayed the moment in his mind, her glare, her pause before. It wasn't my job to protect them. The calm precision of her anger. His producer, Marissa, knocked lightly. "You should see this," she said, sliding a tablet across his desk. A clip of the interview was already viral. Someone had slowed down the footage, zoomed on Meghan's Meghan's face mid-answer. The caption read, "Look at her eyes, she's rehearsed this." George frowned. "They're turning it into theater." Marissa shrugged. "Isn't that what it always was?" He looked out the window at the city that thrived on controversy. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but we forget. Real people burn under those lights." Back in her suite, Meghan scrolled through the flood of comments, her expression unreadable. For every word of support, there was venom. She read one line aloud, almost to herself. She wanted privacy, but she booked prime time. Hypocrisy in heels. Her reflection in the darkened window met her gaze. "You wanted control," she whispered. "Now own it." A knock at the door. Clara peeked in. "They want you back on The View or Colbert. Everyone's offering the same thing, a chance to clarify." Meghan smiled faintly. "Clarify what? That I meant what I said." Clara sighed. "Then what's next?" Meghan turned from the window, shoulders straight. "Next, we let the storm pass, and when it does, I'll tell the next part of the story, on my terms." As night fell over New York, screens around the world still glowed with her image. The Duchess who wouldn't yield, and the journalist who dared to challenge her. In one corner of the internet, a comment read, "For once, she didn't play the victim, she played the game." In another, "Maybe she finally stopped playing." And somewhere between those sentences, between perception and truth, Meghan Markle closed her eyes, letting the noise fade to static. Fade out. The next morning, the city wore its chaos like perfume. Honking horns, flashing headlines, newsstands plastered with Meghan's face. The Daily Post screamed, "Markle draws blood." Buckingham on alert after explosive interview. Inside her suite at the Langston Hotel, Meghan's team was already in crisis mode. Laptops covered the table, each screen tuned to a different network. Her publicist Clara, ever composed, pointed at a digital chart climbing upward. Public interest up 300%. Every outlet spinning their own angle. CNN's calling it a reckoning. The Telegraph says you've waged war on tradition. Meghan sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping tea, expression still and unreadable. They were always going to pick sides. I just made it harder to pretend neutrality. Across the room, her communications advisor Marcus frowned at his tablet. "We just received an email. Official palace statement expected within 48 hours. Her brow arched slightly. "Let me guess. Something dignified and disappointed?" Marcus nodded. "Exactly that tone." She set her cup down. "Then we say nothing. Let them speak into the silence. It'll echo louder." The room fell quiet. Outside, camera flashes pulsed through the curtains. Paparazzi stationed like sentinels. Clara finally broke the silence. "Harry's in London," she said softly. "He called this morning, said it's tense." Meghan's gaze flicked upward, sharp but tender beneath the surface. "Did he watch?" Clara hesitated. "He did. And he said you were brilliant." A small smile ghosted across Meghan's face, gone as quickly as it came. "Then that's enough." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, inside the palace's private communications wing, advisors huddled beneath the portraits of monarchs past. Phones rang non-stop, screens replayed the same clip, Meghan saying, "It wasn't my job to protect the institution." An aide muttered, "She's dismantling the narrative piece by piece." Another sighed, "And we can't touch her. She's not bound by protocol anymore." At the center of the table, an older official adjusted his glasses. "We respond once firmly and then move on. Dignity is our armor." Someone else whispered, "But the public loves her fire. Every denial makes her stronger." The man frowned. "Then we starve the flames." Back in New York, Meghan scrolled through her social feed, hashtags still boiling, her name a battlefield. But beneath the noise, she saw something unexpected. Hundreds of personal stories, women writing about reclaiming their voices, people speaking of survival, agency, boundaries. For the first time in days, her chest eased slightly. "Maybe," she murmured. They finally heard the point. Marcus looked up. "You know what comes next, right? Offers, deals, exposés. Everyone wants the sequel." Meghan smiled faintly. "Then let's make one they don't expect." The skyline outside shimmered under the evening haze, alive and watching. Somewhere between royalty and rebellion, between media and truth, Meghan Markle stood quietly victorious. Not because she won the argument, but because she refused to play by its rules. The next 48 hours felt like the calm before a diplomatic storm. The world waited, breath held, for Buckingham Palace to respond. News anchors speculated in hushed tones. Analysts dissected every word Meghan had said as if decoding a prophecy. Every network ran split screens. On one side, Meghan's composed defiance. On the other, the palace gates bathed in gray London drizzle, and then it arrived. At 6:02 a.m. New York time, an official statement appeared on the royal website. The royal household acknowledges the Duchess of Sussex's recent interview. The family remains saddened by her comments, but will not engage publicly on matters of personal perspective. Duty and dignity will continue to guide our response. No names, no emotion. A masterclass in restraint. But the world read between the lines, and restraint sounded a lot like dismissal. Within minutes, phones buzzed across time zones. In her hotel suite, Meghan sat at the breakfast table. Her team crowded around a laptop. Clara read the statement aloud twice. No one spoke for a long moment. Personal perspective, Meghan repeated finally, almost laughing. Translation, she imagined it all. Marcus sighed. They've played it safe. They're betting on fatigue, that people will move on. They always do, Meghan said, until they don't. She stood, crossed to the window, and stared out at the city. Reporters had camped outside again. Her reflection flickered over the skyline. If they wanted silence, she added quietly, they shouldn't have underestimated my voice. Across the ocean, the palace briefing room was chaos disguised as order. Advisors shuffled through press summaries. One aide whispered, "The public's divided," but younger voters, Gen Z, seemed to side with her. The communications director pressed his temples. "And that's the generation that defines the future monarchy." A pause. "So what do we do?" "Nothing," came the answer. "The institution survives by outlasting stories, not fighting them." Back in Manhattan, Good Morning America prepared for another broadcast. George Stephanopoulos stood before a monitor replaying clips from the infamous interview. His producer approached, holding a folder. "Ratings shattered records," she said. "They're calling it the most watched interview since Oprah." George didn't smile, and the palace just answered without answering. "Exactly. We should invite her back." He turned slowly. "No, not yet." "Why?" "Because now the story's bigger than both of us." Still, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. He had challenged her sharply, maybe too sharply, yet something about her conviction had lingered. The certainty in her eyes, the poise under fire. He found himself watching her final words again. "Peace has a price. I'm willing to pay it." Later that afternoon, as rain streaked down the city's glass towers, Meghan met with her PR team one last time. Marcus scrolled through analytics. "Support's stabilizing. Critics are fading. You've outlasted the news cycle." "Good," she said simply. "Then it's time to shift focus." "To what?" Clara asked. Meghan smiled faintly. "To purpose. We announced the foundation launch next week. Mental health, women's leadership, media accountability. Let them see what I do, not what they say." Marcus looked impressed. "You're turning scandal into strategy." "I'm turning pain into power," she corrected. Just then, her phone buzzed. An unknown London number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A pause, then a calm, clipped voice. "Duchess Markle, this is Sir Jonathan Wells. I'm calling on behalf of His Majesty's office. The King would like to extend a private conversation, off the record." Meghan's hand stilled. Her team froze. "Why now?" she asked evenly. "The King believes some things are better discussed than denied." A long silence followed. Then, "Tell him I'll consider it." She ended the call, exhaling slowly. Clara stared at her. "Was that?" "Yes," Meghan said, placing the phone down. That was the story they didn't expect. Meanwhile, George watched the breaking news banner flash across his monitor. Royal source confirms private outreach to Meghan Markle. He leaned back in his chair, muttering to himself, "So the palace blinked first." The screen behind him looped the same footage. Meghan leaving the studio, chin high, eyes forward. The woman the world couldn't decide whether to crown or crucify. He whispered almost to himself, maybe she did win. That evening, the city turned gold with sunset. On her balcony, Meghan stood wrapped in a shawl, the skyline burning behind her. The air smelled of rain and redemption. The chaos for now had quieted. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed faintly. Old world sound in a new world life. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the city blend into silence. For the first time since stepping into that studio, she allowed herself to breathe. Tomorrow would bring another headline, another fight, another twist. But tonight she belonged only to herself. Not the crown, not the cameras, not the narrative. The lights of Manhattan shimmered below, and the Duchess whispered into the wind, "I wasn't made to bow, I was made to rise." If you like this video, then subscribe.